It's one of Africa's most isolated countries, accused of repression at home and supporting terrorism abroad. 20 years after securing its freedom, Eritrea is still a fiercely independent country, facing down its enemies in the Horn of Africa and beyond. But after years of sanctions and rumours about the health of its president, is it now time for Eritrea to come in from the cold?
To his supporters, he's a model African leader, a war hero determined to make his country self-reliant and to protect them from hostile neighbours. But to his detractors, Eritrea's President Isaias Afwerki is just another brutal dictator, even worse than the late Ethiopian leader Meles Zenawi. With his sworn enemy now dead, some had hoped he would seek peace with Ethiopia and ease alleged repression at home, allowing thousands of exiles to return. But 2 decades after winning independence, President Afwerki shows little sign of changing direction.
Hello, I'm Henry Bonso and this is Africa Today. Well, if the streets of Asmara were anything to go by, Eritreans were in celebratory mood when they marked their 20th anniversary of full sovereignty. The date was observed outside the country too by the huge diaspora spread across Africa, the EU and North America. But many of them were in mourning for the present state of their country. Among them was Bereket Kasai from the UK-based Eritrean youth movement. He's one of my guests today. He's joined by the journalist and commentator Vincent Gassana. And on the line from the Eritrean capital Asmara is Thomas C. Mountain, an independent journalist who lives in Eritrea and witnessed the anniversary celebrations at first hand. Welcome to all of you. Thomas, we'll start off with you. You're in Asmara. What was it like, the actual celebration, people, the mood?
Well, this was actually the 22nd Independence Day celebration. There was a week-long parade and party festival in the center of Asmara. Every night there was about 100,000 Eritreans, mainly young people, parading and then dancing in the streets to live music. I walked the streets for several nights, for hours and hours, and I never saw one incident of violence in that all those hours of those hundreds of thousands of young people dancing in the streets. And there was a very small police presence with not a single firearm in sight. So the overwhelming feeling was Eritreans proud of themselves, proud of their country, and proud of their government.
And when it came to the slogans, the kinds of things people were saying, what were they saying? What were they talking about?
Well, it was just a general feeling of pride because, just to have all these people out in the streets and all feeling united, Muslims and Christians and all the 9 different ethnic groups, and to hearing all these great songs singing about the country and the feelings were like everybody's paid a price to have this freedom, and everybody still has it, and we're really proud and happy. So, I guess it's not so much discussion, it's just sort of a mass feeling of really like of unity.
Thomas, for the moment, thank you very much. Bereket, do you wish you would have been able to be there in Asmara, enjoying the fruits of freedom and independence?
Well, first of all, I had the opportunity to be in Eritrea in the past. I lived there throughout the revolution. I stayed there up until about 11 years ago. But because I was forced to flee the country, that's why I left.
Who forced you to flee?
The regime. As I said, our revolution or our country promised a lot. The revolution promised a lot.
You had a 30-year war, finally ended in 1991, and of course then independence, and then full recognition in 1993. But you're saying what? Do you recognize the picture that Thomas painted of a deliriously happy Asmara?
I disagree with Thomas. It's not the reality and the appearance is totally different.
In what way?
The reality is people like me who were brought up in the revolution, or like any other people also who had lived in Eritrea and served for Eritrea, we were meant our future should lie in Eritrea, but instead the regime stole or hijacked the promises of the revolution that many people paid and sacrificed for the country, for defending the country. In what way did they do that though? In what way? Why can you not be there and live your life as an Eritrean? For instance, our revolution was about ideals. One of the ideals was democracy, justice, freedom, progress, equality. And all those 5 fundamental things I mentioned are missing in Eritrea. That's the reality, let's face it.
But when you say they're missing, can you explain what whether it's soldiers, whether it's politicians, whether it's police, are doing to stop you from feeling free when you're in Eritrea?
All I'm saying is the regime ruling Eritrea, the president, including the PFDJ, the only regime in Eritrea, like Mr. Thomas Mountain said, that he was talking about unity, but unity and harmony cannot be developed with fear or oppression. So in Eritrea, there is no parliament, there is not been election, there is no human rights in Eritrea, there is no freedom of expression. So the regime, for instance, doesn't allow freedom of association, whether you are a Christian or a Muslim. The regime, for instance, denied my right to be freely represented in the student union at the university. Even all the student unions in the country, the National Union of the Youth and Students, are not free from the regime.
All right, well, there are two very, very different representations of Eritrea today. Vincent Gasana, you're not from Eritrea, you're from Rwanda, but you do monitor activities across the African continent. Which version of events is more persuadable to you? Are you more persuaded by?
I think both, actually. That's what makes the Eritrean story very complex. I think that, on the one hand, there is a bit of a dilemma, I think, to me, for anyone who's looking to, any Pan-Africanist looking at Pan-African development and how the way things ought to develop.
Yeah.
On the one hand, I think that the Eritrea story is a seminal story for African development generally. There's one of the countries that it's fashioned a paradigm shift to a development in Africa, a development model in Africa, which, if followed by others, could actually achieve a very great deal.
In what way have they done that? Because you keep hearing about Eritrea being one of just 4 African countries that's marking, or that has achieved 6 out of the 8 Millennium Development Goals, that life expectancy has doubled. Is this the kind of thing you're talking about? And if so, how have they done that?
It is the sort of thing that I'm talking about. But just before I go on to that, I want to say that I also recognize the complaints that Eric makes. So that makes it a bit of a dilemma. So it's not the one thing or the other. The thing that I think that Thomas was describing is perfectly true. Even within the diaspora, there are people who will not hear a bad word said against the Eritrean government, but then there are also people like Eric, and both of them do have a point. You know. Now, in answer to your question, it is one of the few governments in Africa, sadly, where the government or the ruling or governing party is actually went in there to serve its people, to serve its nation. So
everybody starts out that way, though, don't they?
They start out that way, but let's not forget that this has been since 1993. They have been following exactly the same sort of lines, the same promises they said they would follow. And we're talking about the building of the infrastructure. We've got pretty much one of the best healthcares on the continent. I mean, they can now boast almost 80% of the population can access a health center within a radius of 5 kilometers.
But the big question is at what price? Because Bereket says it's at a very, very high price indeed. I'm going to throw some of that back to Thomas in Asmara. What about that? We have a member of the Eritrean diaspora here saying he can't go back home, he's not free. The president, Isaias Afwerki, has never faced an election. Other things have been said recently by the likes of Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, 10,000 political prisoners. You're an American, you're free, you're living there, an independent observer. Can you not see what Bereket is saying and accept it?
Well, you know, I don't see that because the reality is there's freedom of expression here. 11 years ago, he was here. You know, I mean, the people outside have one view, and on the ground here, it's completely different. But let's have a little background first. In the last couple of years, the Ethiopian army has launched at least three division-scale attacks on Eritrea. Division is 5,000 men, okay? So 3 times a division-scale attack in the last couple of years, and yet in that same time period, Eritrea had the fastest-growing economy in Africa. Eritrea has the least debt to the IMF and the World Bank of any country in Africa. Okay, you know, there's other statistics. I can go on and on about all the progress that's being made, but it's mainly in the countryside, not in the city. When you go out in the countryside, you see the people's lives are really changing. The government's putting in solar-powered wells. They're putting in solar-powered schools and medical clinics. This is democracy. When you say democracy...
But Thomas, in that case, why are people continuing to leave? Why is it that the president's own presidential jet ended up in Saudi Arabia, and then when somebody was sent to collect it, she herself defected? Why is it that football teams are constantly defecting? Why is it that athletes, whenever they go abroad, say we don't want to go back home? Isn't that a sign that things aren't well at home?
Well, in the last 9 years, we've had 4 years of drought. We're an agricultural-based economy. So the economy's been in crisis stage because the harvest has failed 4 out of the last 9 years. On top of that, we're being attacked by Ethiopia. Life is hard here. Life isn't a paradise in Eritrea. It never has been. I've never claimed that either. So the fact is, people go outside to make money. They send home and help their families, they help the country. Okay, but you cannot compare the amount of immigrants from Eritrea, which by Amnesty International's own account is 100,000 in the last decade, with the 10 million that have left Ethiopia in the last decade. So if we want to talk about economic migrants or political migrants, we've got to put it in perspective. But it's mainly people going outside to work and send money home. It's not a political question. If you don't believe me, you can go talk to the Home Office Eritrean interpreters who will tell you that privately and what the refugee claimants say to the British authorities is completely different. They'll say to the British authorities we've been persecuted for political reasons, and privately the interpreters they say, no, we just came outside for job and for work.
Okay, so you think Thomas, people like Barakat are simply exaggerating it for political reasons. Let's put that to you, because Thomas insists that the country is improving, the indices of growth are there, the economy is really, really kind of on the up. And in fact, there are far more people leaving Ethiopia than Eritrea. What are you talking about?
All I'll say is it's a distorted picture, what he's saying, Mr. Thomas, with all due respect.
But he lives there. He lives there now.
Well, he moved to Eritrea in 2006. All I would say is his claims are not verifiable. It's not something on veracity, which has been confirmed by independent, or there is not any information to indicate.
So when you talk to your relatives, when you talk to the people you know who are still living in Asmara, still living in Eritrea, what do they say to you? Because Thomas says there's freedom of expression, freedom of assembly.
Well, I disagree with him. I mean, if there were freedom of expression or freedom of assembly, where are the 11 or 15 journalists? All the press been shut down since the 18th of September 2001. I was there by myself in Eritrea. Where are the other members of the parliament and ex-generals who were part of the National Assembly of Eritrea? They just disappeared with no due course.
Let me put that, Thomas, what about that then? Freedom of expression, where are the members of the press, the muscular press? You're a member yourself, but you're an American. Maybe things are different for you.
Well, you know, he's making allegations about an incident that took place a decade or more ago, okay? So, you know, I'm talking about what's going on right now.
Yeah, but what's going on right now, we hear about it from the likes of Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International. They all say the same thing. This is a state run by one guy as a fiefdom, and it's not going to change. This is a big, big problem.
Well, you know, nobody from Amnesty Human Rights Watch has been here for a decade now. So, I mean, I don't know where they're getting their information from, but it's certainly not from people on the ground in the country.
All right, thank you very much for the moment. Thomas E. Mountain, Vincent Gassana will come to you in just a moment or two, but lots of comments have been coming into the Facebook page this week. Let's take a look at a few. We'll start with Lamar Green, who says, if Eritrea's coming out from the cold means allowing people from other continents to determine the fate of their country, no. It's good that East Africa has an independent nation that is outside of US influence. Onto this post from Julius Cato. Julius says, I don't see any tangible signs of change in Eritrea. Thousands of people still languishing in jails for political reasons or for trying to flee the country to avoid conscription into the army, which can keep you from anything up to 40 years old if they choose. I know people that would love to go home to Eritrea but are just too fearful. And finally, this from Salam Michael. Salam says, the Eritrean people are busy rebuilding their country that was devastated by a 30-year war, sponsored and financed by Western and Eastern countries. By the way, when the West says Eritrea is an isolated country, what they really mean is the Eritrean people and government are not permitting Western companies to come in and pillage their natural resources. And if you'd like to have your voice heard, here's how you can get in touch.
Keep your thoughts coming in. Email africa@presstv.co.uk or text us on +44 78 00 00 8086. Or you can go to our Facebook fan page, Africa Today, Press TV London. Or you can now follow us on Twitter. We are at Africa Today TV.
Okay, let's pick up on some of those opinions. Vincent, you heard a range of thoughts there. Which one did you find most acceptable? Because we heard people, Lamar Green, saying if Eritrea is coming out from the cold, well, I mean, I don't want that country to lose its independence. It's good that Africa has a country like this, East Africa in particular. Julius Cato worrying about no signs of tangible change, and then Salam Michael talking about Eritrea being isolated, but it's better that it's isolated so as it doesn't allow other people, big Western multinationals, to come in and pillage their country.
Look, I think I said a little at the beginning of my remarks that the Eritrean story was a seminal story for African development generally. And I think that we miss an opportunity to understand the real truth of what's going on down there if we insist on looking at a black and white situation, okay. Either the sort of remarks that Thomas has been making or the sort of remarks that Eric has been making. As an example, look, the Eritrean diaspora is hugely involved within their country. They contribute in proportionately more than probably any other African diaspora. And they're hugely involved in all of this. But at the same time, there are people like Eric who genuinely and sincerely feel that things could be loosened up.
Well, it sounds like he wants a lot more to be loosened, more than being loosened up. I mean, for example, a president who's never faced an election.
Well, I think, again, I mean, let's take that. On the face of it, absolutely valid complaint. But on the other hand, you know, Eritrea, since their independence, is still, to an extent, living almost under a state of, not necessarily a state of war, but the aftermath of war, because not too long after their independence, they again plunged into this war, somewhat unnecessary war with Ethiopia.
But there are many African leaders who quote threats abroad, real or imagined, as an excuse to repress their people at home. Some have said that's one of the reasons why Paul Kagame has such a stranglehold on the people and on the milieu in Rwanda, because there are the Interahamwe or the Genocidaire across the border in eastern Congo. You know, and so therefore he can't afford to be so liberal and multi-party because the country isn't ready. There are too many enemies. But you know, many African leaders say this.
But you know, I won't try and, there isn't enough time to try and handle those two, so I will leave the Rwandan story aside for a bit. But a lot of the time, this is actually true. You know? Eritrea has been very much under siege from all comers, and we need to take with a pinch of salt this idea that the Americans have rather hyperbolically say that it's a rogue state, it sponsored terrorism and so on. We need to take that with a pinch of salt.
Well, it was an independent UN report about a year or so ago that did come forward and say this is happening and that it's sponsoring Al-Shabaab in Somalia and indeed Kenya.
But you see, Al-Shabaab was actually a result of interference through Ethiopia as a proxy by the Americans into the Somalian situation. Again, it's a much longer story. The Union of Islamic Courts were bringing stability within Somalia. And
so this is a revenge, is it, by Eritrea?
Yeah,
so we're going to sponsor these people now?
Not at all. Well, they don't, you know. Actually, let me give you an example.
They do, though.
The UN reports are very suspect. I'll give you an example. Not too little while ago.
If you will.
Yeah, 2011. There was a bomb plot in Addis Ababa at an African Union meeting. Yes. And this was blamed on Eritrea, backed up by, again, another UN report. You know. And a little bit later, we learned, between conversation in American diplomats, we dropped in because WikiLeaks told us that actually the bomb plot was as a result of Ethiopian security services. Now, at the time, this was not publicized, but Eritrea was pretty much made subject to this.
But WikiLeaks said a lot about, WikiLeaks also revealed a lot about the state of mind of the Eritrean president. Some very unflattering things were said about him by the then US ambassador. Let's go back to Thomas Mountain, who is in Asmara. Thomas, isn't the fundamental fact this, that we have a president, he was a liberator, as many African presidents post-1950 odd have been, but then decided to stay in power, didn't put himself up for election, stayed too long, one-party state, it's for the good of the people. Isn't that what you have, what we have in Ethiopia? Eritrea.
Eritrea. Well, you know, Meles Zenawi had a whole lot of elections. The last election, he won 99.6% of the seats in
Which is why I tripped on my tongue.
You want to talk about African democracy, 99.6% of the seats in parliament. Now, you want to talk about democracy in Africa, that's what the West holds up. So, I mean, you know, in Eritrea, we know who our leader is. He's been our leader for a long time. He's the best man for the job. Everybody recognizes that. We don't have to have an election to tell us that.
But if he's the best man for the job, why doesn't he do what so many other countries across Africa do? Yes, people have their complaints, and rightly so, about what happened in Ethiopia. However, that's not the standard. He has to create a better standard. You know, Isaias Afwerki has to create a better standard than what went on across the border in Ethiopia.
You're speaking of a Western democracy where you have elections.
Okay.
We practice more of a traditional democracy here that's based on consensus, where you go out in the communities and you don't force things down their throats.
But in many African countries, traditional societies, you have to be able to throw out your leader. You have to be able to replace your leader. Isn't that your fundamental point, Barakat?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We have known democracy as people in our tradition. We embrace democracy in our tradition. Not only when Eritrea been liberated or when the Italians came and formed Eritrea. So we are familiar to democracy as people. We can elect people who runs our affairs, even locally. And the president, unfortunately, is practicing the opposite.
What would you like to see the president do? Because we now have a prime minister across the border in Ethiopia, Mr. Deselen, who says, I'm prepared to have talks. Meles Zenawi has now gone, he's dead, the sworn enemy. What would you like to see him do? What would you like to see happen between Ethiopia and Eritrea? Because that could affect the atmosphere in Eritrea, as Vincent was saying.
Yeah. Well, this requires a political will, time and space. And our president, as far as I know, I'm not going to comment on Ethiopia. The border issue could be solved relatively quickly.
How?
Depending who is going to be leading Eritrea. If authoritarianism is institutionalized in Eritrea in this way, and the president and his inner circus are creating siege mentality to oppress us, this border issue is not going to be resolved at all.
I could hear Vincent sighing there.
It's a little. I mean, this is the difficult with all of these things. I think the opponents will refuse to look at the good things, and those who are supportive will refuse to look at the.
But if you're feeling oppressed, it's very hard to look at the good things.
Well, actually, no, it isn't necessarily, because I think that this is not. Look, it is true to say that it is as though. To me, it is as though the Eritrean leadership feels that, look, we're doing exactly the right things, and anybody who disagrees with us wants to derail the good things that we're doing. Okay. So they go slightly over the top in trying to shut down any kind of criticism.
I'm going to have to shut you down, Vincent,
but let's talk about
run out of time.
Yeah, very quickly.
Really sorry about this.
The Ethiopian line, it's simply the UN has said that where the demarcation line is, Ethiopia has refused to accept it. If they accept it, this goes away.
Thank you very much indeed. Very stimulating discussion. And that's it for today, and thanks to all those of you who sent in comments to us. Email africa@presstv.co.uk or text us to +44 7800 008086. And don't forget, you can now follow us on Twitter @AfricaTodayTV. Many thanks to our guests, Barakat Kasai, Vincent Gazana and Thomas C. Mountain. Join us next week for another edition of Africa Today. Till then, it's goodbye from me. And on behalf of the whole team, thanks again for watching.